why when our mothers were in their mothers' wombs, you and I were already in our mother's womb. So we have been gestated in our grandmother's wombs as well as our mother's wombs. So the exposures that our grandparents had at that time will also have trickled down generationally to us. So when we say, what can we improve? What can we do to improve fertility a month before we actually want to be pregnant? We're asking for a lot. We're asking for a very short-term impact on a generational situation here.
That's right.
And so what happens is that we really are asking a lot of our bodies. And many women, when they are experiencing difficulties and experiencing challenges, they blame their body, they blame themselves for, what's happening. But the truth is that there shouldn't be a sense of blame. There shouldn't be a sense of, it's your fault or it's
You are now tuned in to this week's episode of our podcast. Today we are going to interview some of the greatest and most influential minds in our field. By sharing our collective expertise, we will show you how to harness, control, and use your own skill set to achieve ultimate success and live the life you want. And now, please welcome your host.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to Life Well Lived by Amabala Stephen. It's an engaging and enlightening talk show on life, relationships, and the business of life. Grab a cup of juice and just chill. Life Well Lived by Amabala Stephen. Live life. Live fully.
It's a pleasure having you on the show once again. This is Amabala Stephen. You're also on Life Well Lived. Life Well Lived by Amabala Stephen is the self-improvement and personal development podcast with the occasion of expert and professionals who come to the show to share disruptive mindshift content on topics on the personal development and self-improvement. Today on the show, I have Gabriela Rosa, who is the Harvard University awarded scholar of fertility specialist, clinician, and best-selling author. Not only that, Gabriela is the founder and director of the Rosa Institute. Welcome to Life Well Lived, Gabriela Rosa.
Thank you so much, Amabala, for having me. It's lovely to be here. Absolutely.
It's lovely to have you on the show, Gabriela. Now, I'm looking forward to your expertise on today's show. Now, we're going to be focusing on women and fertility. Now, that's very important and a dear discussion for me. Now, let's talk female fertility. Why do lifestyle count?
That's a really great question. And I will even take one little step back in that question and say that fertility is a team sport. It is never something that is only up to the female, because as we know, we have a situation where we have a 50-50 equation in order to be able to create a baby. We need the egg and we need a good quality egg, but we also need excellent quality sperm. And so what happens is that in standard therapy, in medicine these days, a woman is very much the focus of the trying to conceive equation. But in my opinion, I have been doing this work now for 20 years, helping couples overcome infertility and recurrent miscarriage when other treatments have failed. And I have seen case after case in treating thousands and thousands of patients in every continent other than Antarctica, that it is never only up to the woman. And so from the perspective in which we look, from that lens, we need to understand what are the things that a woman needs to do and that a man needs to do in order to optimize their chances of not only taking home a baby, but taking home the healthiest possible baby, especially when the path hasn't been straightforward. And that will come down to the question that you've just asked, which is, why is lifestyle so important? The truth is that for the vast majority of humans, the exposures that are in our environment, whether they're lifestyle, diet, chemicals, you name it, those things are all going to play a role in how our body responds to whatever is around us. And it will, in one way or another, respond and react to that exposure. So let me give you an example. You know, we all have heard of people who have never smoked a day in their life and die of lung cancer, right? And then you've got those people who are chain smokers and never develop lung cancer after all. And the reason for that is what we call epigenetics. It's an arm of science that studies and understands what are the differential reasons why people exposed to the same chemicals, the same things, develop a certain condition or a particular version of a condition and another person doesn't. You know, so basically with epigenetics, what happens is that the person who is a chain smoker who never develops lung cancer and the person who never smoked and develops lung cancer, their bodies respond to stimuli in a different way. So in the same way, it applies to fertility, to reproduction, to, you know, for one person, their health predispositions might be their musculoskeletal system or their nervous system or their digestive system. For another person, it's their reproductive system. And so when you ask me, you know, why is it that lifestyle is so important? Lifestyle is only as important as the foundation for optimum health. Because if we give the body the opportunity that it needs to be the healthiest that it can be, typically it will work well. If things aren't working well, if we're having symptoms, if we're having disruptions in the way in which the body's operating, then we need to ask why. We need to understand what it is that we can change and what it is that we need to do more about. Does that make sense? So lifestyle is important. And I often say to my patients, you know, the key to understanding what are the things that you need to do to optimize your chances of taking home a healthy baby is actually quite simple. It's to act pregnant now to get pregnant later. And it applies to both men and women. And I know that if men could get pregnant, we would be in trouble in terms of population growth. But, you know, they would really think many, many times before wanting to have a baby, you know, come out of their reproductive system. And so what happens is that but let's just, for the sake of this example, let's just pretend that men and women can both deliver healthy babies or can both deliver babies, okay? What would happen, and the act pregnant now to get pregnant later analogy really is looking at what are the things that if you were pregnant right now, if you were pregnant right at the second, what are the things that you would immediately start doing or stop doing to ensure that your baby developed in the healthiest possible way and that you could deliver that healthy baby to term, right? That question is extremely important because if you think about it, a pregnant woman, what is the first, you've had 4 children, I've had 2, you know, what is the first question that pops into a pregnant woman's mind when she discovers that she's pregnant? Isn't it, oh my God, I hope my baby's going to be healthy? Or is my baby going to be okay? Right? That is the first question that a woman, like the second that you see that positive pregnancy test, you're like, is my baby going to be all right? Right? And so then you start to think about all of the things that you are doing, not doing, should be doing, you know, to really make sure that you give your baby the best possible start in life. And so this is what couples really need to almost embody at this point on their journey before a conception is even in place. Why? Because by 8 weeks gestation, which is around about the time that most people find out they're pregnant, a baby's health blueprint is set for the rest of their life. A baby already has all its little organs, all its little fingerprints. Really, all that is happening to that child from 8 weeks gestation to delivery is that it's developing and growing further. Right, but the majority of their health predispositions are already in place in the genetics of the parents and grandparents, because this is another very important consideration. Fertility is a transgenerational concern. And the reason for that is that, think about this, Amabola. When your mother, you see, women, we are born with all the eggs we will ever have, okay? So when you and I, when our mothers were in their mother's wombs, you and I were already in our mother's womb. So we have been gestated in our grandmother's wombs as well as our mother's wombs. So the exposures that our grandparents had at that time will also have trickled down generationally to us. So when we say, what can we improve? What can we do to improve fertility a month before we actually want to be pregnant? We're asking for a lot. We're asking for a very short-term impact on a generational situation here.
That's right.
And so what happens is that we really are asking a lot of our bodies. And many women, when they're experiencing difficulties and experiencing challenges, they blame their body, they blame themselves for, what's happening. But the truth is that there shouldn't be a sense of blame. There shouldn't be a sense of, it's your fault or it's their fault. Like I said, first and foremost, we have the egg and the sperm, not just the egg. We are not asexual creatures. We can't reproduce asexually. And we can't reproduce from one gamete. I mean, some fish can, some other animals can, but we can't. As humans, we need two gametes. And so basically, we need to take that whole picture into consideration. And of course, there are many things that you can do, starting from, as you've asked, lifestyle. How can you improve your health, and so on and so forth. But those are things that we do need to take into context as a whole, not just take pieces of this puzzle and try to have a full puzzle just from its pieces. Does that make sense?
Sure. Right. Now, you talk about conception. Prior to conceiving, when is the right time for a woman to visit the gynecologist? And what are the things, or what are some of the important things to expect?
Yeah, no, look, that's a great question. You see, it's really interesting because I remember being 11 years of age and getting my period for the first time and thinking, oh my God, what do I do now? And I spoke to my mum, obviously, as you do. You just go to your mum and they say, something's happened. And look, in my household, everything was actually always very open. My mum had a period. She wouldn't be hiding from us that she had, a bloody pad or whatever. And so I had the opportunity up until the age of 11 to ask many questions in terms of, why does this happen? How often does this happen? And, all of these things. And I had a really kind of straightforward thinking mum, who's amazing. And I love her so much. And, one of the very first things that she did was she said, okay, here's a calendar. Now, what you're going to do for every day that you have a bleed, the very first day you mark a cross, and for every day of that bleed, you mark a cross. And you do that every single time that you have a period. And that is such an important thing that most women, I have been astounded as a women's health practitioner to discover in my career that the majority of women do not know when they're expecting a period. They do not know what part of their cycle they're at. They do not know when they're about to ovulate. They do not know when they're about to, get pregnant or have a baby or, it's astounding to me. And the reason that I say it's astounding is that this is basic, empowering women information that is essential to know. So the very first thing, even before we go to a practitioner, the very first thing is for women to understand their cycle, is to understand what is normal for them. Because just because textbook normal is a 28-day cycle does not mean, myself, for example, I was diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome at the age of 18, which meant that I had gone for months to years without having a period. And had I not known, this, and it started to happen when I was around 18, up until from 11 to 18, I had regular periods, and then it started to be very irregular. And I then got diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome, which incidentally, polycystic ovarian syndrome creates irregular cycles. There are other metabolic conditions that may be associated, insulin resistance, diabetes, and so on. Thankfully, I've never had any of those other conditions, but certainly have had many of the symptoms of polycystic ovarian syndrome in my lifetime, especially irregular cycles. But even through those times, I would actually, every single time that I got a period, I would mark it down in my calendar so that I knew what was actually likely to be happening around that cycle and when I was likely to be getting another period and so on. when we look at a woman's cycle, typically